Afternoon. My name is Martijn van Napel. I'm an architect from the Netherlands. If you would look at my LinkedIn profile, it will say business data architect, but that's just a way to elude recruiters. I've been 23 years in data now. I just was thinking about how long am I working actually in this field, and this year is my 23rd year. And the central theme in my work has become a little bit, why do data projects fail? And more importantly, how to fix it. So I've been writing over the years a lot about on this subject. And one of the things I will go into today is, well, actually us, the data people. The story of the presentation is that data people are humans too, and they exhibit human behavior. We often like to lament the lack in data governance and data management, but we are actually part of the problem. So today I will focus on that part. If you would take a look into an average organization and look at what a typical conversation concerning data is, it might look like this. We are debating a lot about technology and the things that we are doing, and those users are having questions that they want to have answered. So one of the least understood obstacles in working with data is data itself. I've come to the conclusion that all data has meaning within a context. I mean, that's a given that most people would agree on, but I think that actually all data is context. And why do I think this is the case? Data is in fact a breadcrumb trail. It mirrors our activities. It's a breadcrumb trail of everything we do, the activities that we set out as people. Data is always a subset. It's always a partial view of reality, never reality itself. No two people draw the same conclusions from the same data. I think everybody who's been working in this business for a few weeks will have experienced this. The same data will lead to different conclusions when the context changes. That's an interesting one, because the data that you have, actually the figures are frozen, are still the same, but within a different context, the conclusions drawn from that figures could change. And data processing and data interpretation is a profession in its own right. It's hard to do, actually, to work with data and to work with figures and to draw the right conclusions out of it. There's only a small percentage of the people who are actually able to do this in a consistent and right way. And yet we work with data all the time. I have written more about why I think all data is context in an article I published recently. You can find it on my website, preachwhatyoupractice.nl. And the story is a two-part story called An End to the Data Fairy Tale. Okay, data processing and data interpretation is a profession in its own right. So how do we deal with context switching in a structural design pattern? Which we do every day. We have data captured in a context, the events, business events, the transactions, the interactions that we capture in data and in data sources. Then we do some data modeling, data preparation, data provisioning based on those data captured. And then that data is used in different contexts, within marketing, within finance, decision-making context, all kinds of different contexts within the same organization. So we have the sources, we model it in a warehouse or a lake, and we have analytics and operations kind of cubes and applications which we use the data in to serve out for applying it. And we have multiple sources. Then we try to consolidate that into one model, and then we have different applications once again. So this is actually very complex that we are doing. So how do we humans deal with communicating complexity? Um, I think every one of you has experienced that a user says, I have a simple question. This is my question. Can you answer it with data or analyze it for me? And then you say, well, I can try and will do my best. And then you're puzzling and trying to get the picture complete. And after a few days, the people is phoning you very annoyed. How much time do you think it will take you to answer my question? It's very hard to explain to people who are not used to working with data that actually data modeling and the things that we do is very complex. Um, Not only that, but data modeling and data preparation and data provisioning is so complex that we as data professionals are finding it hard to deal with it in the right way. And one of the things that we do to get an understanding and to communicate the complexity of the things that we are doing amongst ourselves is that we are adding a data professional context, creating our own language, as so to speak, as to communicate about how complex this is. And one of the problems that we have is that there is no formal education on data. It's there are some people trying to do this, but there are not that many and consistent ways of having a formal education on what data is and how to deal with it. And we lack a body of knowledge and a language which is transferable to other people. If you, for instance, compare this to the medical world, they have a very formal language that you are being taught at university to communicate about medical things. It's something we still lack in the data profession. So what do? We have to figure out this language ourselves. So if you are fresh from university or you start working in the data field, then you have to acquire that language that we speak as data people. And once you speak the language, the professional language, you are part of the cult of the data people. So examples of our language. These are the things that we talk about. And no one but us understands actually what we are talking about. And even if we are talking about these terms, we even don't agree ourselves on what is meant with the words that we use to describe our work. So while we're still busy debating our semantics, the users are still waiting for us to provide the answers that for the questions that they have. Okay, if we turn this around and we start with a question, a very easy question, like what is the percentage of renewable energy in the national energy consumption? Quite a simple and also very valid question. Um, but what about an answer? There are numerous sources to find data on how much renewable energy is being produced in a given country or within the European Union. But what if you're Greenpeace? Or what if you're the European Union and you're trying to make a taxonomy on what energy sources are green? What if you're an asset manager in a utility company? The source of the data is the same. I mean, you can pinpoint to the source of where the data is generated. You can pinpoint at a windmill or a solar panel or a plant where energy is being produced. But the interpretation of how many of those sources are renewable and what is the percentage of the national energy consumption is pretty hard to answer actually. And one of the problems is that no two people draw the same conclusion from the same data. And it had to do with the fluidity of context in which questions are asked. When people are having these questions, the context in which they ask the questions is never fixed. It is fluid. So in the example of Greenpeace or the EU, the context can be political. So in those arguments that we have and why we ask these questions and the context from which we are asking these questions, we are starting to turn to data in search of objectivity. But the problem that we encounter then is that data is not neutral. Its interpretation is subjective to a personal or a professional conviction. Someone from Greenpeace will have a different interpretation on a source, a energy source being green as to someone who's working for an energy provider, a utility company. A famous example, for instance, right now is biomass. So wood from forests, which is cut out because of wood maintenance and being used and burned for energy production. It was mentioned as being an important part of the renewable energy sources within the EU, but is being taken out of the taxonomy of green energy in the EU after political pressure. The problem that we face is that the context of data captured and data used is shaped by many contradicting contexts in everyday situations. Like marketers, controllers, logistical planners, IT developers, each and every one of us have different contexts of how we capture the data and we use the data, even if we are talking about the same data point. There are always several equal valid answers to any question being asked based on data. And the result is, or rather, what I've noticed is that there is this formula for complexity. If you increase the number of data sources that are available to you for use, and you have more context in which this data is captured or data is used, then you get a kind of exponential function of complexity. The complexity of data is right now exploding with the amount of data that we are acquiring. And the result is that more data doesn't mean more insight. More data means more confusion. It's very hard to fish for relevant data in an ocean of irrelevant data. It takes a lot of effort to get and find the right data. So there's a clear paradox here going on. The effectivity of using data decreases with the amount of data available. So how do we deal with this complexity of working with data? And this is where a personal sphere of influence gets focus. Every one of us has a personal sphere of influence, meaning the things that you can control and the things you cannot control. So you try to, within your function and your profession as a data professional, you try to focus on the things that you can actually control and influence. And the result is of this increased complexity that our data professional context is been shrinking to technology, because technology is the thing that we can control. Right now, if I look at the current state of the industry and the data projects going on, is that the current universal answer to all problems is technology. And why is that? A lot of companies say they want to become data driven. But what do they mean when they say that they want to become data driven? I think it's an expression of the want for technology to mediate a problem which is caused by human communication and which can actually only be solved with human communication. I don't say that technology is irrelevant. Of course, technology has its utility, that's not being questioned. But I think we're trying to find solutions in technology And we have a focus on technology for things to repair things that we cannot control and which are due to human communication. So what can you do as a data professional? One of the things that you can do, and I offer you 3 simple things which I notice work in everyday situations, is organize data journey sessions. And what do I mean with data journey sessions? Um, if you sit with different people who are involved in a transaction or an event or a business process, so the things that you draw out on the canvas in an event and the timelines and stages that data passes through in a business process, and you have all the people on board who are part of the data journey, you can talk about it. In a lot of instances, I've found that people are working in their own professional context, not being a data person, but keying in data into a system. And they haven't got a clue what's being done with that data, who uses that data, who is depending on the things that they key in into a system. So if you sit together and you talk about what the journey of a certain piece of data is, where it's entered, who modifies it, and who uses it for what reasons, then you can start to define common context in identifying the problem and the solutions in a particular problem that you face when you start to work with data. And this works wonders. Just people sitting together and talking about what they do with data gives a lot of understanding on the people who are part of this process about why it's important that they key in data in a specific way. Work in multidisciplinary teams. Well, that's not new. A lot of people work in agile environments these days, but I often found that people are doing the agile rituals, but not understanding the reason why they are in an agile team. And I think one of the most important parts of an agile team is being multidisciplinary. Why is it so important? Because you stimulate a continuous conversation between developers, analysts, and users. You, as humans, communicate about the data, about what you want to use it for, about the problems that you encounter, about whatever has to be discussed. And human communication solves a lot of misunderstandings. So this in practice, again, if you actually have a multidisciplinary team you're working in, works wonders. And the last one is regularly discuss which problem are we actually solving. I think everybody has experienced that you are trying to do something and to build something and you encounter a lot of problems in reality and you thinking about, okay, how do I going to prevent a lot of problems that will occur? And before you know it, you are designing very complicated solutions to fight future problems that you think might happen. So if you are regularly discuss about which problem are we actually solving again, it remedies over designs. It helps you to keep things simple, but also to keep it changeable. If you want to talk about a subject and discuss it with me, these are the ways where you can reach me. My website, Preach What You Practice, is the point where I gather all the things that I write about these subjects. So there's a lot of things that you can read, which I've written over the years. So it's a source of information. And that's my presentation for today.